Welcome to Leveraging the Laboratory, a Mayo Clinic Laboratories podcast for administrators, outreach managers, and laboratory professionals to learn how to best leverage and optimize the laboratory for patients, clients, and staff. I'm Jane Hermansen, Outreach Manager at Mayo Clinic Laboratories. And joining me today are Dijkman Dulkes and Brianne Newton, Mayo Clinic Laboratories Outreach Solutions Strategists. The focus of today's discussion is outreach program management. Most specifically, what do I know now that I wish I had known when I started? Because we know as lab professionals, we receive a lot of training. We follow a college curriculum, we take board exams, we have competency evaluations, and it's a very structured process. But for anyone who's an outreach manager or is seeking to become an outreach leader in their own laboratory, I'm going to bet that you aren't having any luck in finding a supportive curriculum to build your knowledge base, right? And that's because there isn't one. So today we're going to talk to two of our Mayo Clinic Laboratories Outreach Solution Strategists to recall their days in the trenches as hospital laboratory outreach managers. And the hope is that we can learn from their experiences and hopefully shorten your own learning curve. So with that thought in mind, what I wish I had known then, let's get started. Dijkman Dulkes, you were an outreach manager for well over 15 years. What would you consider your largest successes during that time? And please don't be shy.
Oh, goodness. Oh, Jane, you just described my path to Outreach Management 101. I was a medical technologist in the 80s, and I stayed at my organization for 37 years. I worked in the clinical lab as a blood banker and a chemist and a hematologist. I was an education director for a medtech program. And then I really started to learn the other side of the house, the anatomic pathology side of the house. And I learned about billing, professional components, and I built about reports. And the big thing of the day was getting an integrated report with a pap smear and an HPV result on the same report. That wasn't part of my training. And in my years as outreach, I took over from my boss, who was the previous outreach manager, where he just managed 10 accounts. And they all had a variety of fee schedules. They reviewed those contracts every so many years. They had to be renewed. There were no evergreen clauses, and it was at varying times of the day. Times of the year. I grew outreach from 10 clients with a variety of fee schedules from my previous boss. He had a different way of doing things. You know, the contracts had to be reviewed and updated every couple of years. The fee schedules weren't consistent. Everybody was customized, and it was really hard to manage. When I took over for him, I grew the outreach program to 40 clients. Anatomic pathology and clinical pathology, medical directorships, autopsy agreements, nursing homes, private practice physicians. But Jane, your question to me about what was my proudest accomplishment, I think it was taking back our laboratories, the organization laboratories, from a commercial reference lab. And we did that in 2012, 3 stat labs and 7 draw stations. And my experience that I gleaned along the way in my lab profession really prepared me well for that. But I couldn't have done it without leadership of the lab. The operations leadership needed to invest in technology. So they laid the foundation with high throughput instrumentation, and they upgraded the lab information system so that it was nimble enough to accommodate the excess volume. And the project was slated to bring in over $1 million. And I was the project lead to pull that off. Now, the contract we had with the commercial reference lab was 150-day out clause. And you all know that you can't pull this off in 150 days. But I had really worked on communication and networking and pulling the right folks together, subject matter experts, because I didn't know everything. I didn't know anything really about doing this. I had never done it before. But I relied on pulling together a steering committee that removed obstacles. And then I would have stakeholders meet regularly to talk about how we're going to hire staff and how are we going to move specimens? How are we going to partner stat lab tests with area hospitals? and then really working on a training and education plan. And so we hired, I think, all of the commercial lab techs, about a third of the phlebotomists, most of whom are all still with the organization. It was a lot of IT training and weekends and times. But honestly, the success of that organization in 2012 to pull back our labs from a commercial reference lab probably is my proudest achievement, Jane. But I couldn't do it alone. And the list, you see the movie credits at the end of a movie. And oftentimes I've given presentations on this, and I have pages and pages of people to thank. So it was a great project.
So obviously you had a lot of growth. You took your labs back. You had a lot of lab support, staff support. Those were key. If you had to give some advice to someone, if you'd gotten some advice early on, what would have helped you be more effective in accomplishing those goals?
I think for me, and sort of what I did and what I would encourage others to do, is you need to learn from others. I was a Mayo client before I worked for the Mayo organization, and a lot of the tools and tips and tricks that Mayo is able to provide others, I invented or stole or borrowed from others. So ask a lot of questions. The other thing I would say, it's important to understand what is the world like for the people that utilize your services. So whenever I would onboard a new client, I was the point person to manage that client, meaning I was with them for that first week or two, trying to smooth out the bumps. Similarly, I would be in the lab on the second and third shift when the specimens came in so that I could work with the client. Clients want to do things right. They just don't always know how to get a specimen to our laboratories. I would ride with the couriers and understand what some of the logistics are with them, with clients not getting the specimens prepared for shipment or traffic patterns, and maybe we need to look at routes so that they arrive more timely. And then I would say the third thing is be involved with your professional organization. I think that's been really nice to meet other leaders and really to identify new technologies or trends in the laboratory world.
Fantastic. So I'll summarize. Number one, you said walk a mile, understand where your customers are coming from, be there with them, and then don't be afraid to learn from others and network. Okay, Brianne, we're going to switch over to you because you were actually hired into an organization to start that outreach program from scratch. Ellen inherited at least a customer base and some processes. You didn't even have that. How did you know where to begin?
Yes, that I did. And that was the case. And I didn't know anything, to be perfectly honest. And once you dive into something like that, you don't know how much you don't know until it's time to start something you've never started before. And so being brought into an organization to start outreach really began with trying to put together a vision of what I was going after for myself, so I could put a mental picture together on what I was working toward, and then beginning to convey that in that mental picture to others, because outreach didn't exist in this organization. And so it was up to me to begin to share what we were trying to do so that others could catch that vision, so others could see what we were trying to do. So that was one of the things, quite honestly, I had never had to do before. I came from being a bench tech, supervisor, to having just left the education world and MLT program director, to now back in the hospital as an outreach manager. And so vision casting and things like that had never been part of any class I had ever taken in ed tech school. And so that was the first thing, was just trying to wrap my head around what my new mission was. And then understanding each of the different parts as the requests were coming in from different entities on, okay, well, how is that going to affect my department, my billing department? How is that going to affect my IT department? As those different questions were being asked, I then was burdened with the responsibility to go find out. And so there was a lot of research, there was a lot of digging online, there was a lot of emails to other people in the industry of, please help me understand what I'm getting into. And Jane, I believe that you were even one of them. As the time I was a Mayo client, and just sent and said, here's what we want to do. Can you help me understand the difference between X and Y, because I'm having a hard time and I'm struggling. And so there was a lot of self-education. And then once I could wrap my head around what we were trying to build toward, then it was up to me to then go network with people who were currently doing it. And so that's when I began to reach out to outreach colleagues, attend conferences where that information was being presented, like the Leveraging the Lab conference that Mayo hosts, and really just trying to work toward that. But it was very much the wild, wild west in the beginning, with not a lot of fences and things put up to where I really knew what I was doing. But so much of that was just individual pieces, educating myself on finances, educating myself on how to find your cost per test, or how to, review contracts and begin to put in terms that made sense to me, and just these disparate pieces, and then assembling them into a toolkit that made sense for someone trying to do what we were trying to do.
So you talked about the pieces, and do you feel that the pieces are unique to every organization, or are they consistent? Is that anything that you learned from others about maybe new areas for you to be looking that you hadn't considered in your own place?
I absolutely believe so. Yes. So just as everybody's going to come into possibly this role with different sets of skills you may or may not have picked up along the way, that's kind of what I was looking at. Was there were some things I had down pretty well, and some things I didn't. So just reaching out to others as far as how to put a business case together for executive presentation, how to vet out IT solutions. I had never gotten the option to do that. I just kind of was given, and here, be happy and use this. And so it was bouncing ideas and learning from others' experience, but also trying to get advice from them. Here's questions you need to be asking. Here is some pitfalls or some mistakes that I made. Stay away from them if you can. Didn't keep me from all of them. I tripped over my own stuff here and there, but it was definitely helpful and useful to learn from those that were doing it already and doing it successfully.
Got it. Thank you so much. Okay, Ellen, I'm coming back to you again, because I know that you have spoken at national conferences and you've used the tagline, "Doing the test is the easy part." Can you tell us why you say that, and go into detail, because it's a lot, right?
Yeah, doing the test is the easy part. That is not a term that I came up with. I have to give credit to my previous boss, and he was the previous outreach manager. And he said, Ellen, he says, and I actually used to say to him, I don't know what you do all day, because I never saw him at operations meetings. And I really didn't have a true understanding of what outreach meant until I got the job and I started doing the job. And he said, doing the lab test is the easy part. You have reagents, you have calibrations, you expect a result, you can plan your day pretty much doing the lab test. You have expected results, reference ranges. It tells you if it's critical with these robust IT systems. But outreach is really, when I made the transition from bench tech to outreach manager, I knew a good understanding of my day. But now with outreach, I plan a very small piece of my day, because inevitably a client has an issue with a courier who is parking in the handicap space. A courier may go off the road, especially where I live, into a river when the weather's really bad. You may have staffing issues in your client response center and you're not sure how to manage it. A lockbox, maybe the courier doesn't come and pick up the lockbox, and a pathologist who doesn't have specimens, or they need to be sent out, and you really are the middle person to solve those issues. So doing the test, if you're on the bench and you disagree with me, I totally get it, because doing the lab test is not the easy part, but managing outreach clients is like herding cats. And so what I did, and what I continued to do when I was in that position, and I couldn't know everything about everything, but I would have a monthly, regularly outreach meeting where I would pull in key stakeholders to talk about what they're dealing with clients. So marketing, for instance, we'd open new draw sites. They would put together a brochure of our open hours of the draw sites, and the physician office practices would disseminate them, or we'd update the lab handbook with our times. Billing, a client isn't getting their bill and they don't want to wait every 30 days. Well, we generated a report that would print when the test resulted so that they could send the bills out prior to that monthly invoice. Registration, they need to register the patient in the hospital EMR, but the the sending organization and your receiving organization talk a different language, and how do you bill for those services? Supervisors and managers, do they have the capacity to bring in new lab tests? As the outreach person, I could go out and get all kinds of new business, but if the lab tests start coming to the lab and they're not prepared for it, then you fall flat on your face. So you really get one time to make a first impression, and having true outreach support to manage those relationships just smooths out the bumps. Call center, do they have what they need so that they don't have to transfer a call every time they get one? And how soon are those calls being answered? Does it ring and go to voicemail? Do you have a phone tree? So all those pieces play an important role in the client experience. And then accounts receivable and accounts payable. Are you getting paid by your clients, or are they going to collections? Hopefully not. A good outreach manager should have a sense of who the clients are that maybe the company was sold and now they're not getting the bills. And clearly contracting, the best thing we ever did where I used to work was have an evergreen contract, and then the prices just renewed as your costs change. Your prices would reflect that annually. So I guess really the doing the test is the easy part. Now, having lived in the outreach world, it seems pretty applicable because there's no book, and like you said at the beginning, there's no training guide. But honestly, the Mayo outreach team is really here to help those that need that help and assistance. So why reinvent the wheel? So,
okay, Ellen, that was a lot of stuff.
yeah.
What do you wish you knew then that you know now? If you could go back and talk to your previous self, you talk about herding cats, internal stakeholders, equipping staff. If you had to say 3 things, don't forget to do these 3 things, what would they be?
Ooh, 3 things, don't they be? Ask questions. My dad used to say, Ellen, if you don't understand something, ask why. I think he dreaded that when I was a teenager, but I ask a lot of questions. I take scrupulous notes, and I think that really helps me to stay organized. I use a SharePoint site or OneNote to keep track of what's happening with what clients. Communication needs to be bi-directional. There's no such thing as a bad client, typically. They just don't understand the expectations of what your organization requires of them. And it's really trying to be a mentor to both the client and then your operations folks, because, they shake their head and go, that client X always screws up. Well, I would take that personally and say, well, they don't want to screw up. They're great people. Let me help them how to be successful. And then the third thing I said, the needs of the patient come first. And everybody's on the same team. And even when I was the project lead to take that lab back from a commercial reference lab, that agreement was beautiful. I mean, it was an end of a relationship, but the patient was always at the forefront, and the patient never experienced a lapse in care from changing from one organization to another.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, Brianne, kind of the same question, but a little different flavor on it. So with all of the many tasks that you had to accomplish, you talked about just all of the learning and all of the things that you had to figure out what to do. How did you prioritize from all of the things that you had to accomplish? Were you on your own? Did you have help? And if you kind of took a misstep in the middle, what happened then?
So this is where I get to tell everybody where I screwed up. Okay.
I
avoided
that question.
I know, Ellen, you're a smart woman. I did. I'll own to any missteps completely and fully because I've already told everyone I didn't know what I was doing when I started, so it's okay. Prioritization is such an interesting beast because to me, so much of putting one thing in front of another and is a fluid situation because access to the resources that you need to accomplish B before A or A before B can change, especially inside of an organization. And so oftentimes what I would find myself doing is almost like an internal report card. Okay, what are the things that I need to do? What are the tasks that I have left? And let me go to either my leadership or my stakeholders and find out, okay, here's the next thing I'm going to tackle. Do I still have access to this? Is there still money? Is there still resources? Do I still have the support and the staff that I need to get this accomplished? Sometimes it was a yes and sometimes it was a no. And so oftentimes that's kind of where I learned how to put things in the right priority. Now, in reaching out to other people at other outreach programs or industry experts, oftentimes they would say, okay, this would be an example of something that you would want to tackle first, because you can't have this without this without this first thing. And so there was guidance, and there was some fence posts that I could go by. But as we've learned in working with clients across the country, everyone's list of priorities is a little bit different in what they feel like they can tackle first. Launching something from the beginning might be a little more difficult than improving something that's already on its way. And so it's just a matter of keeping that flexibility, which is not the easiest for us lab folks, but maintaining a sense of flexibility, but also continuous check-ins with the people that were going to influence the success of my program to find out, is this still the next step that makes sense? Because if any of the dynamics have changed, maybe I need to flip what I consider the next priority.
So being nimble and flexible, and knowing that when you've seen one, you've seen one. And I think that's actually what we observe when we work with hospital outreach programs across the country: big, small, mature, immature, massive business, small business, and different geographies. There are different themes with nearly all of them, but I'll echo what Ellen said. There's always a focus on the patient, making sure that we're doing the right thing for the patient. Knowing that we could probably talk for hours on this topic, we could, right? If you had to actually just pause and say, if you could give 2 or 3 key pieces of advice to any lab manager, things that you wish you had known earlier in your own leadership careers, what would those 2 pieces be?
So I would just say folks are tired. Folks with post-COVID are working really hard. And really, I would look to leadership to help work smarter, not harder, to really help staff to be successful. I think folks are leaving the profession. I think folks are trying to re-engage medical technology programs and phlebotomy programs, so that as soon as they're not hired, they're leaving to go to another job in the organization. And I think we need to be creative, some out-of-the-box thinking to help staff.
Very good. My advice would be toward the leaders that are walking into or stepping into these roles is, it's okay not to know all of the parts and pieces, but you need to own it. You need to acknowledge that you don't know those things, because you will be found out that you don't. But again, own it, embrace it, and then it's okay not to know all of what's expected of you, but it's not okay to stay there. And so it's a matter of being diligent, being responsible to go learn, ask, find out what, where your knowledge deficits lie, and then begin to fill those in. And then the other thing is phone a friend. Yes. And then the other thing would be is we consistently hear from clients that want to know what's out there. What are some solutions? Because all of us in the outreach world encounter the same problems. And so no matter the maturity of the program or the maturity of the leader in charge of that program, there is always additional ideas, solutions, creative ways to tackle whatever. And so that can only be accomplished through idea sharing and continuing to learn about ways to accomplish things that are common to all of us.
Fantastic. And the only thing that I would add is make sure that you have a friend who's in the upper echelon of your leadership, somebody who's going to help remove some barriers, because you will run into them over time. And with that, I know that we've reached the end of our time today, and I truly want to thank both of you guys for sharing your thoughts on what you would have liked to have known earlier in your outreach career. So I hope that the audience today has gleaned some new knowledge and will be able to shorten their own learning curve. And truly, the reason we're doing this is because of our patients and supporting our organizations in delivering community-based medicine. So I appreciate today your knowledge, experience, and your willingness to share what you've learned over time. Thank you for listening to Leveraging the Laboratory, a podcast from Mayo Clinic Laboratories. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. And until next time, we encourage you to continue to promote your community-based laboratory. The needs of the patient come first. We invite you to share your thoughts and questions by email. Please direct any suggestions to mcloutreach@mayo.edu and reference this podcast. So if you've enjoyed this Leveraging the Laboratory podcast, please subscribe. And until next time, we encourage you to continue to promote your community-based hospital laboratory. And remember, the needs of the patient come first. Thank you.